Jonathan Sacerdoti is from the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and can tell us more. Jonathan, very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Tell me the mechanics of this. If someone is abused verbally or physically or sees deplorable graffiti, anti-Semitic graffiti, what should they do first?
We do receive a lot of phone calls from people who've had these anti-Semitic incidents happen to them or around them, and we think it's very important that we should be able to give them the best advice on what to do in those situations. The first thing that they should do when they feel that there's been a hate crime committed against them is to report it to the police. Now that might seem obvious, but an awful lot of anti-Semitic crimes, hate attacks against Jews of any sort, just go unreported, and that means that there's an under-evaluation of how many of them there are going on. Even with that in mind, though, we know that last year saw a record number of anti-Semitic incidents as counted by organisations like the CST and the police itself, and we know that that's something that's got to end.
So, Jonathan, when someone from the Jewish community, or not actually, it doesn't need to be someone from the Jewish community to report an anti-Semitic crime, reports it to the police, is it logged as a hate crime or is it specifically logged as something that is anti-Semitic so you can see the stats on this?
The police keep as much information as they can on hate crimes. Obviously, we'd like it so that when people do report, they're very specific that it was anti-Semitic in nature. And the CST that I mentioned earlier does also do recording of anti-Semitic crimes. So we encourage people, when we give them information in any way that they contact us, that they should contact both these organisations. And of course, these things are very important. The Prime Minister himself said earlier this week that if the Jewish community does not feel secure, then our whole national fabric is diminished. He said it was a measure of the vigour of our institutions and the health of our democracy that the Jewish community feels safe to live and flourish here. And we commend him for saying that. It's quite right. We need to hear more messages like this from people like the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, who we've had dealings with, who's very supportive of what we're doing, and the police themselves and the Crown Prosecution Service. What we're really calling for is not just the reporting, of course, of these crimes, but that under the existing British law there should be a policy of zero tolerance so that anti-Semitism becomes something that is completely unacceptable to all in Britain, and Jewish people feel far more protected. Because in our own survey that we released in our anti-Semitism barometer just in January of this year, we found that 45% of British Jews fear that they may have no long-term future in Britain. That's an enormous number when you think about it. 1 in 4 have considered leaving the country. Now these are things that should make everybody concerned, not just the Jewish community, because it shows that there's a problem in society when a minority group doesn't feel that they're being protected sufficiently well.
Jonathan, are we anywhere near the levels of fear that French Jews are seeing? I mean, reports are saying, certainly at the beginning of this year, that something like 15,000 Jews may well leave France for Israel this year. Is that the fear that we're heading towards that level?
Things are definitely not as bad here in Great Britain as many would say they are in France, but that doesn't mean we can be complacent. Some of the same threats exist. So those terror threats that we saw in France, both in the shooting of Jewish school children in Toulouse and the shooting of Jewish shoppers before the Sabbath in the kosher supermarket in Paris, and beyond that, the shooting of Jews in the Jewish Museum in Brussels, and the killing of that Jewish volunteer security guard outside the synagogue in Copenhagen, and a list of non-fatal attacks on Jews across Europe over the last 5 or 10 years. These are things that naturally make people afraid here in Great Britain. Thankfully, we haven't had a similar attack here, but that doesn't mean we're immune from them. The same Islamist terror threat that motivated those attacks also exists in this country. We read daily of British-born jihadis who go to fight in Syria, who go to join ISIS, and these are the sorts of people who are returning. Mehdi Nemmouche, who is alleged to have carried out the killing in the Jewish Museum in Brussels, was identified by 2 French former hostages held by ISIS as one of the torturers and imprisoners who was in fact responsible for their imprisonment there. So we know that there are these links. And just to give you an example of some of the things that are happening in Great Britain, in Manchester in 2012, a Muslim couple were convicted of preparing a bomb which could have killed dozens and researching Jewish targets to use it on. And earlier this year, Mahmoud al-Chowdhury, a teacher in South London, was pleaded guilty and convicted of posting on Facebook an image of Hitler, praising Hitler and the Holocaust. Astonishingly, it fell to us at the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism to refer him to the National College of Teaching and Leadership, and his case is now being decided and looked into over whether he can continue to teach. But these are very real problems, and it's very disturbing to hear that we can have cases like this of a teacher in a state school in London in 2014, 2015, who's able to post these images of Hitler praising the Holocaust, and then imagine that Jews should feel like there isn't exactly a problem in the country. This needs to be taken seriously by all.
And lastly, Jonathan, where should people go online?
Well, our website is at antisemitism.uk, and we're very happy to provide both research there and also information on how people can contact us. And then we will give them the necessary information we can. They should also call the police if they have any problems. Of course, if they're injured or in need of medical help, immediate help, they should call for an ambulance. And the Community Security Trust, which looks after the interests of the Jewish community in these sorts of matters, also operates certain helplines and hotlines that they can call. So there's a lot of help out there. There's a lot of people looking into protecting the Jewish community, and we need to make sure that we turn this tide and that this tipping point is pushed the other way so that Britain remains the safe place for Jews to live in that it currently is. We need to make sure that it stays that way.
Jonathan Sacerdoti from the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, thank you very much indeed for joining us.